So let's take a look at this problem that's going to ask us to do a hypothesis test about a single proportion. Why do we know that it's a hypothesis test about a single proportion? Let's read the question. The question says, suppose that 222 subjects are treated with a drug that's used to treat pain, and that 55 of them developed nausea. So already we know that we're talking about a proportion because they're telling us that 55 people out of a total of 222 people had nausea, possibly as a result of this drug. So we're talking about a smaller group out of a larger group, so a proportion of people from a larger group that had some kind of quality. Then it says use a 0.01 significance level to test the claim that more than 20% of users develop nausea. So when they give us a significance level and tell us to test a claim, that generally means that we are doing a hypothesis test. So this is a hypothesis test, and it's going to be about a proportion from one sample because they only gave us one sample of information here. So first we need to identify what the null and alternative hypotheses are for this particular problem. So they told us here that we're going to test the claim. Claim is the key word that you're usually going to look for. The claim is that more than 20% of users develop nausea. So more than 20% are the keywords that I'm looking for here. We are looking in the alternative hypothesis, the H1, to see which one says more greater than 20%. So that's going to be letter D. Remember, the H0, the null hypothesis, always should have an equal sign in it. Always. So we already know that letter C is not going to be the answer before we even move on, because the H0 does not have an equal sign in it. As long as the H0 has an equal sign in it and the H1 has the appropriate inequality or not equal to sign corresponding with our claim, then we know we've got the right one. So this one is correct because it says the null hypothesis says that the proportion is equal to 0.2, which is 20% in a decimal form, and the alternative hypothesis H1 says what our claim is, that the proportion is more, greater than 20%. To get the test statistic for this hypothesis test, we're going to go ahead and use technology. So let's go ahead and open Statcrunch. We can go to Statcrunch by clicking on Get More Help and then selecting Statcrunch right here. Let's see if we can just move this a little so we can see the problem at the same time. So all the hypothesis tests are going to be under this stat dropdown. Now we are doing a hypothesis test about a proportion, so we're going to choose proportion stats. Remember, they only gave us information about one sample, so we're going to choose one sample. And we're going to choose with summary. They didn't give us the raw data here. They just gave us a summary of the information when they told us how many people there were that developed nausea out of the total. So stat, proportion stats, one sample with summary. So the number of successes here is supposed to be the number of people or things that had some quality that we were looking at. Let's see if I can get this a little smaller so we can see the problem. So here the number of successes is the 55 people that develop nausea. Now developing nausea doesn't sound very successful, but all the success word means is that there's some quality that we're trying to observe, and that many people or things had that quality. The total number of observations was the total number of people in the survey to begin with. So that was the 220. Remember, we had 220 subjects who were treated with the drug. Next, we're going to perform a hypothesis test. Hypothesis test should already be selected, so you can leave that selected here. And we're going to go ahead and change this number. Remember, we were looking for the proportion to be equal to or greater than 20%, so 0.2. So we'll type 0.2 here. Notice that will change the number here and here. Next, we need to make sure that the direction of our alternative hypothesis is correct. Notice this says HA and the problem said H1. That means the same thing, it's just different notation depending on style. So we were looking for the proportion to be greater than 20%, so we're going to choose the greater than symbol right here. That's it. So we're going to click compute. The test statistic is this number right here, the one under Z-stat, 1.785, etc. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy that number and come back over to our problem and paste it into the answer field. Now this said to round to 2 decimal places, so that means we only want 2 numbers after the decimal point, 7, 7. I look at the next number after that second 7 and it's an 8, so that means that I'm going to round that other 7, the one right before it, up to an 8. So 1.78 is the test statistic. Next, it's asking us for our p-value. The p-value was also in Statcrunch in that same field we were just looking at, and it was right here under p-value. So I'm going to copy that number. Again, this one said to round to 3 decimal places, so after the decimal point we'll go 1, 2, 3 places and be on that first 7. To know how we round, we look at the digit that comes after. What comes after is a 7, which means we round up, so we're going to change that first 7 to an 8. So 0.038 is our p-value. So now we need to actually interpret this hypothesis result. When it comes to p-values, this is how we are always going to make decisions about our hypothesis test. If the p-value that you get is less than the significance level, which we sometimes call alpha, then you are going to reject H0, the null hypothesis. If the p-value is more than the significance level, alpha, then you will fail to reject H0. Fail to reject is just a fancy way to say you do not reject it. Here, the p-value that we got is 0.038, and the significance level we were using is 0.001. So this p-value is more than the significance level. If the p-value is more than the significance level, then we need to fail to reject H0. So we already know that the answer here is either going to be A or D, because those are the only 2 answers that say fail to reject H0. Okay, so let's think about what that means. What did H0 say? Here was H0. Remember, H0 said we're going to assume that the proportion of people who got nauseous was 20%. Okay? That's usually our base assumption, that there's no change, there's no effect by this treatment or whatever is going on in the scenario. So here we're saying, no, the proportion of people is 20%. It's not more than 20%. It just is 20%. And our claim was that the proportion was more than 20%. But if we did not reject, we failed to reject H0, then in essence we accept that it's possible enough that this H0 statement might be true. So in other words, we say, I'm willing to believe, I feel like I have enough confidence to say that it's possible within reason that the proportion of people who felt nauseous is actually equal to 20%. And if I believe that that's true, or at least it's possible, I can't reject it in any case, then I did not support my other statement, which said that the proportion was more than 20%. So the answer here is going to be D. There is not sufficient evidence to warrant support of the claim that more than 20% of the users develop nausea.